I'm 86. I started the first black-owned bank when they denied us loans. I am 86 years old. My name is Samuel Sam Jefferson, and I need to tell you about the day I walked out of Citizens National Bank in Birmingham, Alabama, with my loan application stamped denied in red ink and decided to start my own bank. That was 1963, and I had just become the fourth black man in Alabama history to be turned down for a business loan, despite having perfect credit, solid collateral, and a detailed business plan. The loan officer, a young white man who couldn't have been more than 25, looked me in the eye and said, "Sam, you seem like a good Negro, but we just don't lend to your people for business ventures. It's too risky. Maybe try saving up the money yourself." I walked out of that bank with $500 in my pocket, a dream that every bank in the state had rejected, and a decision that would change thousands of lives over the next 60 years. Within 5 years, I had opened Jefferson Community Bank, the first black-owned bank in Alabama. Within 15 years, we had helped over 2,000 black families buy their first homes. Within 30 years, we had financed more black-owned businesses than any other institution in the Southeast. Today, I want to tell you how one man's rejection became an entire community's liberation, and why economic empowerment is still the most important civil rights issue we face. I was born in 1938 in Bessemer, Alabama, just outside Birmingham, during the height of the Great Depression. My daddy worked in the steel mills when he could find work, and my mama took in washing to keep food on the table. We lived in a company house that we rented for $3 a week, money we often didn't have. But my daddy had a dream that kept him going through the hardest times. He wanted to own his own house. "Samuel," he used to tell me while we sat on the front porch of that rented shack, "a man ain't really free until he owns the ground he stands on. Everything else is just borrowing somebody else's dream." Daddy saved every penny he could for 15 years, keeping his money in a coffee can buried under the back steps because no bank in Alabama would give a black man a savings account that earned interest. By 1950, he had saved $800, enough for a down payment on a small house in a colored neighborhood. We went to 3 different banks in Birmingham, dressed in our Sunday best, with Daddy's money order and pay stubs, and a letter from his foreman saying he was a good worker. Every single bank turned him down for a mortgage, not because he couldn't afford the payments. He'd already been paying more in rent than the mortgage would cost. But because he was black, and banks didn't lend to black folks for home ownership. "It's nothing personal," one loan officer told us. "It's just bank policy. We don't make loans in colored neighborhoods because property values are unstable there." Property values were unstable because banks wouldn't lend there, which meant black families couldn't buy homes, which meant property values stayed low. It was a perfect circle designed to keep black families from building wealth. My daddy never did buy that house. He died in 1953, still paying rent, still dreaming of owning land, still believing that someday things would change. At his funeral, I promised myself that I would find a way to break that circle for other families. I was 15 when Daddy died, and I had to quit school to help support my mama and my 2 younger sisters. I got a job at the same steel mill where Daddy had worked, but I also enrolled in night school to get my high school diploma. I was determined to learn everything I could about business and finance. While my friends spent their evenings playing cards or chasing girls, I spent mine in the library reading books about banking, economics, and business. I read about how banks worked, how loans were evaluated, how interest was calculated. I read about successful black businesses in other cities, insurance companies in Atlanta, funeral homes in Memphis, barbershops that had grown into chains. Most importantly, I read about the few black banks that existed in other states and how they served their communities. I learned that the first black bank in America had been founded in 1888 in Washington, D.C., and that there were black-owned banks in cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia that were helping families build wealth and start businesses. That's when I realized what Alabama was missing: a financial institution that understood the black community's needs and wasn't bound by the racial restrictions that governed white banks. By 1955, I had my high school diploma and had saved enough money to enroll in business courses at Miles College, a black college in Birmingham. I worked at the steel mill during the day and attended classes at night, studying accounting, economics, and business law. My professors thought I was crazy when I told them I wanted to start a bank. Samuel, Dr. Washington, my economics professor, said, "Banking requires enormous capital, regulatory approval, and community trust. The barriers for a black man in Alabama are almost insurmountable." But Dr. Washington also taught me something crucial. The word almost means there's still a path, even if it's difficult to see. I graduated from Miles College in 1958 with a degree in business administration and immediately started working on my plan to open a black-owned bank. I knew I needed three things: capital, expertise, and community support. For capital, I started with my own savings, $1,200 I had managed to save over 10 years of working and living with my mama. But I knew that wouldn't be nearly enough. Banks required at least $25,000 in initial capital to get a charter, and I needed operating funds beyond that. So I started talking to every successful black business owner I could find. I visited barbershops, funeral homes, restaurants, and small stores throughout Birmingham's black neighborhoods. I explained my vision: a bank that would serve the black community, provide loans for homes and businesses, and help families build generational wealth. Most people thought I was dreaming. "Sam," they'd say, "white folks ain't never gonna let you start a bank. They got that game locked up tight." But a few visionary business owners understood what I was trying to do. Mr. Arthur Shores, a prominent black lawyer, invested $2,000. Dr. Moses Jackson, who ran the largest black medical practice in Birmingham, contributed $3,000. Mrs. Ruby Davis, who owned 3 beauty salons, invested $1,500. By 1960, I had raised $18,000 from 15 different black business owners who believed in the vision of economic independence. For expertise, I knew I needed to understand banking from the inside. I applied for jobs at 3 different white-owned banks, knowing I probably wouldn't be hired, but hoping to learn something in the process. To my surprise, Citizens National Bank offered me a position as a janitor. The pay was terrible, and the work was humiliating, but it gave me access to the inner workings of a real bank. While I mopped floors and emptied trash cans, I watched how loan officers evaluated applications, how tellers handled transactions, how managers made decisions about credit and risk. I worked there for 2 years, saving every penny and learning everything I could about banking operations. The white employees barely acknowledged my existence, which turned out to be an advantage. They talked freely about bank business as if I wasn't there, and I absorbed everything. By 1962, I had learned enough about banking to know that I could run a small community bank better than most of the people I'd observed. I quit my janitorial job and started working full-time on getting regulatory approval for Jefferson Community Bank. The Alabama Banking Commission was not enthusiastic about my application. I spent 6 months navigating bureaucratic obstacles that seemed designed to discourage me. They required additional documentation, extra references, and multiple revisions to my business plan. But I had one crucial advantage. The civil rights movement was putting pressure on all Alabama institutions to demonstrate they weren't discriminating against black citizens. The Banking Commission couldn't legally deny my application based on race, and my business plan was solid. On March 15, 1963, I received official approval to open Jefferson Community Bank with initial capital of $28,000 and authorization to accept deposits and make loans throughout Jefferson County. I rented a small storefront in the heart of Birmingham's Black Business District, hired 2 tellers who had worked at other banks, and bought used furniture and equipment. On opening day, April 15, 1963, I stood behind the counter of my own bank and welcomed our first customer. Mrs. Sarah Williams, an elderly woman who had been saving money in coffee cans for 20 years, walked in with $47 and asked to open a savings account. "Mr. Jefferson," she said, "I never thought I'd live to see the day when I could put my money in a real bank run by somebody who looks like me." That $47 became the first deposit in Jefferson Community Bank's history. But opening the bank was just the beginning. The real challenge was convincing the Black community to trust us with their money and proving to regulators that we could operate safely and profitably. Many Black folks had never had bank accounts before because they hadn't been welcome at white banks. They were used to keeping their money at home or with informal community savings clubs. We had to educate people about the benefits of banking, earning interest on savings, building credit history, accessing loans for major purchases. We also faced skepticism from people who wondered if a Black-owned bank could really be safe. They'd heard stories of Black businesses failing because they couldn't get support from white suppliers or customers. They worried that putting their money in our bank was risking their life savings. To build trust, I made a commitment to transparency that was unusual for banks at that time. Every quarter, I published detailed financial reports in the Birmingham World, the local Black newspaper. I wanted depositors to see exactly how their money was being managed and that the bank was growing stronger every month. I also instituted an open-door policy where any customer could schedule a meeting with me to discuss their financial goals or concerns about the bank. Most bank presidents were remote figures who never interacted with regular customers. I wanted to be accessible to every person who trusted us with their money. The breakthrough came 6 months after we opened, when we approved our first home mortgage loan. Robert and Mary Johnson had been renting a house in Smithfield for 8 years and had saved $600 for a down payment on a $3,200 house. They had been turned down by every other bank in Birmingham, despite Robert having a steady job at the post office and Mary working as a school teacher. Their combined income was sufficient to cover the mortgage payments, but white banks wouldn't lend in Black neighborhoods. I personally reviewed their application and visited the house they wanted to buy. It was a solid, well-maintained property in a stable neighborhood. The Johnsons were clearly responsible people with steady income and a history of paying their bills on time. We approved their loan for $2,600 at 6% interest over 15 years. When I called Robert to tell him the good news, he was silent for so long that I thought the phone had disconnected. "Mr. Jefferson," he finally said, "are you telling me that we can actually buy our own house?" "Robert," I said, "that's exactly what I'm telling you." The Johnson family moved into their home on November 15, 1963. They were the first Black family in Birmingham to receive a mortgage from a Black-owned bank. Word spread quickly through the community. If Jefferson Community Bank could help the Johnsons buy a house, maybe other families could achieve the dream of home ownership too. Over the next 2 years, we approved mortgage loans for 127 Black families in Birmingham. The total value of those loans was $284,000, representing $284,000 worth of wealth that had transferred from white landlords to Black homeowners. But home loans were just the beginning. Small business loans turned out to be even more transformative for the community. In 1964, a young man named James Washington came to see me with a business plan for a small grocery store in a Black neighborhood that was underserved by existing retailers. James had worked as a manager at a white-owned grocery store for 5 years and had learned the business from the ground up. His business plan was thorough and realistic. He had identified a good location, calculated his startup costs, and projected his revenues based on the neighborhood's population and income levels. He needed $4,500 to lease and stock his store. Every bank in Birmingham had turned him down, not because the business plan was weak, but because they didn't believe Black-owned businesses could succeed. I studied James's plan for 3 days and concluded that it was actually quite conservative in its projections. The neighborhood he wanted to serve had 2,000 residents who were currently traveling miles to shop for groceries. A local store would definitely attract customers. We approved his loan for $4,500 at 7% interest, Washington's Grocery opened in February 1965 and was profitable within 6 months. James paid back his loan early and came back 2 years later for a second loan to expand into the adjacent storefront. By 1970, James owned 3 grocery stores and was one of the most successful black businessmen in Birmingham. More importantly, his success had inspired dozens of other entrepreneurs to pursue their own business dreams. The 1960s were a time of tremendous social change, and Jefferson Community Bank found itself at the center of Birmingham's economic transformation. As the civil rights movement opened new opportunities for black advancement, our bank provided the financial foundation that allowed families and businesses to take advantage of those opportunities. We financed the first black-owned insurance agency in Alabama. We provided startup capital for 3 black-owned restaurants, a dry cleaning business, and a small construction company. We helped 47 black families send their children to college with education loans. But our most important contribution was helping ordinary working families achieve financial stability and build wealth. By 1970, Jefferson Community Bank had $2.3 million in deposits and had made over $4 million in loans to black families and businesses. We had helped 890 families buy their first homes and financed 156 small businesses. More importantly, we had demonstrated that black communities could support their own financial institutions and that black families could be excellent credit risks when given the opportunity. The 1970s brought new challenges as the banking industry became more competitive and regulated. Larger banks started targeting black customers they had previously ignored, and some of our depositors were attracted by the convenience and services that big banks could offer. We had to evolve to stay relevant. We added checking accounts, car loans, and savings certificates. We installed the first ATM in a black neighborhood in Birmingham. We started offering financial education classes to help customers understand complex financial products. Most importantly, we expanded our mission beyond basic banking to become a community development institution. We started making loans to nonprofit organizations, community groups, and social service agencies that couldn't get financing elsewhere. In 1975, we provided the construction loan for Birmingham's first black-owned shopping center. In 1978, we financed the renovation of a historic building that became affordable housing for senior citizens. In 1982, we made the loans that allowed a black church to build a community center and daycare facility. By the 1980s, Jefferson Community Bank had become more than a financial institution. We were a catalyst for community development and a symbol of black economic empowerment. The 1990s brought consolidation in the banking industry as large national banks absorbed smaller community banks. Many of our peer institutions sold out to larger banks or were forced to merge to survive. But we remained independent, focused on our mission of serving the black community and promoting economic development in areas that larger banks still considered unprofitable. We pioneered several innovative programs during this period. First-time homebuyer education classes that help families understand the mortgage process and improve their credit scores. Microloans for very small businesses, as little as $500 for someone starting a home-based business. Individual development accounts that match savings for low-income families working toward home ownership, education, or business startup. Financial literacy programs for high school students to prepare them for adult financial responsibilities. Each program filled a gap that larger banks wouldn't address because the profit margins were too small or the customers were considered too risky. But we knew that these risky customers often became the most loyal and successful when given proper support and education. Today, at 86 years old, I'm still actively involved with Jefferson Community Bank, though my son Marcus serves as president and my daughter Linda is chief lending officer. The bank I started with $28,000 now has assets of $85 million and serves customers throughout Alabama and Georgia. We've made over 15,000 home loans totaling $340 million. We've financed more than 2,800 small businesses. We've provided scholarship loans to over 3,500 college students. The Johnson family, our first mortgage customers, saw their $3,200 house appreciate to $45,000 over 30 years. They used that equity to help all 4 children attend college. Their son became a doctor, their daughter became a teacher. James Washington, our first business loan customer, eventually owned 8 grocery stores. More importantly, he employed over 100 people and mentored dozens of entrepreneurs who started their own businesses. We proved that when you give people access to capital and treat them with respect, they'll move mountains to succeed. The wealth gap between black and white families is still enormous, but I've seen what's possible when barriers are removed and opportunities are created. Build your credit, save your money, invest in assets, start businesses, support black-owned financial institutions, pass wealth to the next generation. Remember that individual success is meaningless unless it lifts up the entire community. The reason I started Jefferson Community Bank wasn't just to make money. It was to create opportunities for thousands of families locked out of the financial system. At 86, being denied that business loan in 1963 was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to create something bigger than the small business I had originally planned. Sometimes rejection is just redirection toward a bigger purpose. Your purpose is waiting, your community is waiting, your legacy is waiting. I chose to break through, and it made all the difference, not just for me, but for thousands of families whose lives were changed because one man refused to accept no. That's the power of economic empowerment. That's what's possible when we control our own economic destiny.